Let's talk about character design and three major mistakes that I have made over the past couple of months in my own character designs that I am now running into. These mostly have to do with rigging and animation related things, as that is usually where you start running into issues. Because modeling and texturing, you can do anything you want with that, but the moment your character needs to start coming alive is where you run into issues. So for the first one here, and it's a really simple one, but for this character here, I've got a number of combat animations, which are just simple sword swings, and I've been animating that with just parenting a sword object to the hand bone. And by and large, that is fine, but what I'm figuring more and more is that it's also limiting because I can't animate this sword independent from the hand that is holding it. And since the hand here doesn't really have any detail, no fingers whatsoever, and there's no clear visual representation of the wrist, it would be nice to have a little bit more freedom to change the rotation of the sword within the hand. And even with a slightly more detailed model, right? A sword can move within the hand depending on how you grip it. And if you don't have a specific bone that you're going to parent your sword or whatever weapon you have to, you will be stuck with just having it parented to the actual hand itself. So tip number one that I found out the hard way is make a specific extra bone from the hand that is going to hold your weapons. I'm going to redo quite a bit of this character, because one of the other issues also comes in with this specific character. And that is definitely one of the things that I'm personally going to be doing differently. Mistake number two is more about the body mechanics. Because as you are modeling, you need to keep in mind how your character is going to be moving and if that makes any sense at all. With this spider, you can see that its joints are these mechanical rings going through these linking bits. And as such, the only way that these legs can move is rotating, if we go into the pose mode here, is rotating in their local axis. And that's also how I have the inverse kinematics set up. So it will only ever rotate around its only possible axis of movement. That's all fine. But what I didn't think about while modeling this, and something that I'm probably not going to redo the entire model for, is that for a proper walking animation, you need to be able to move in the direction. So if we're walking in, say, this direction over here, right? The legs need to be able to move into that direction because they land on the ground and either the body needs to be able to move forward or the leg needs to be able to move backwards. That's all relative, right? Because when you're making a walk cycle, the body remains stationary and the legs move backwards. Then when you implement it in the game, it looks like the leg remains steady on the ground and the body moves forward. With a character design like this, I can't move these legs into that direction because they can only ever rotate in these angles and not in an angle like this. And in the end, the solution to that is just like accepting that that is a thing and only having the legs move up and down like this. And in game, this works well enough, but it's not good. It doesn't look great because there is no leverage being created by the legs that would naturally push the body forward. And you can very much tell that there's no weight to the walking animation. In this case, I have decided to keep it the way it is because I like the enemy design and I want it to feel more mechanical. And these type of joints that I've made here really accomplish the more mechanical feeling that I'm going for. But it's not something that I had in mind while creating the character itself. It's an issue that I ran into after the fact. So I want you guys to be more aware of that. And for the last one, we're going to go back to this character over here. And this is about body proportions. Because as you'll be able to tell, this character is proportioned somewhere in between a chibi type character and a more actual humanoid proportion character. but it's still leaning a little bit too chibi for some of the animations that I want to do. And I'll show you the exact animation that made me realize that, because I wanted to have a sword swing down like this, right? It's a very stiff animation, and the reason this didn't end up working is because the sword being like over its head, as you would probably want it to be for that, is not really possible with how this arm works. The arm simply isn't long enough to bend. If we go into object mode real quick, the arm simply isn't long enough to go out here, bend up, and then have the sword held up there, right? It just goes straight through the head up there. There's two parts to this. Number one, proportionally, the head is absolutely fucking huge, which doesn't help the situation. But also, if we go back to edit mode, for instance, we can use a ruler here, or measurements, to see how wide this model is. From arm to arm, it's about 5 meters. And a normal human proportion, going from T-pose end to T-pose end, should be roughly the same length as head to toe, which, if we go through there, you'll be able to see, if we zoom in a little bit, the head to toe is 1 meter taller than the arm to arm. That might not seem like a lot, but that's a full 20% more. Add to that the fact that, as I stated before, the head is unusually large, so if I want to be able to get this character to a point where, I don't know, I can make the animation that I need for the downward slash, having the sword held above its head. In order to make that work, we would have to deform, stretch this arm out until it's like probably at least this long on both sides. You'd obviously do this a little bit more carefully if I were doing this for real. And at that point, we're starting to look a little Slenderman-ish. And even now, it might not even work that well. So then we would also try to like deflate the head a little bit. And now we have an entirely different looking character with much different proportions, and it doesn't work. It doesn't look as good. So at that point, I have to redesign my entire fucking character in order for that specific animation to be able to work. Now, the way it looks right now, it definitely also is very rushed, and I'm going to need to reanimate this specific animation. But the moral of this entire story is when you're creating your character design and you're making the actual model, you need to already be aware of how it's going to be moving and what things would limit that movement, and then avoid those specific things. Like, do I need to be able to reach above my head with the hands of the character? If so, you need to have arms that are long enough for it. The head needs to be relatively small for the shoulders to actually be able to reach over it. And with all that in mind, the character design as you have it might not support that kind of thing. So the other alternative is changing the animation, such as I've done here. Again, there's definitely a lot of work to be done on this specific animation, but what we can do instead, possibly, is instead of lifting it up over his head, what I'm doing is I'm bending back quite a bit more, and I probably could stand to like bend this back even a little more. And we have the sword more in front of the face, still held up high. And even then we can see that the shoulder and arm here don't look like they're having a good time. So maybe if we rotate this around a little bit more, that would definitely help. And here I could cheat things a little bit if I were able to move the sword on its own. And that gets us back to the very first thing that we discussed today. And with a little bit of trickery, we can definitely get to a point where this is like somewhat reasonable. But look at the fucking arc that this back needs to make in order for this relatively simple pose to even come close to looking somewhat like it's working. And of course this arm needs to have some major changes to it as well. But this is probably not a great alternative either, right? So As a public service announcement to all the indie animators out there, plan ahead. In any production process that you're doing, planning ahead is very important, but you don't want to spend hours and hours making and rigging a character only to figure out that actually the things I had in mind for it don't end up working. Learning from mistakes that you make, or in this case, hopefully learning from seeing mistakes other people make, is just as valuable as actual immediate actionable information in a tutorial. So maybe I'll be doing more of this. Of course, I only make these whenever I make a bunch of mistakes and I can compile them into one video, so it's not going to be a very regular thing, but thanks for watching anyway. Hope it was helpful in some way, shape or form, and next time we'll be back with a normal-ish tutorial. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page.